actually it's false prophets who tell you that the Messiah will come secretly in a secret place that only some people know about. Jesus said when he comes back, it'll be like lightning.
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam Camp, and I am your host. And helping to take our leadership to the next level, we have Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Great to be with you, Sam.
Always a pleasure, Richard, in these perilous times that we live.
Yeah.
As we've been working our way through leadership and what that looks like in the end times.
Yeah.
We are now on our third installment of the yet to be determined
when the end will be for that.
For that, for this series, there is no end that we know of yet, but we'll
There's signs of it.
There are for sure. Before we dive in today, though, I will remind our listeners that we've got a coaching workshop coming up in the fall in October.
Yeah.
And we will leave links to that, as always, in the show notes. And if you're interested in learning how to ask better questions to help move people onto God's agenda, it is the workshop for you. It's very hands-on. It's very practical. You'll actually do some coaching. You'll get to witness some coaching. Yeah. And it's a really, really, I think, enlightening time for anyone who works with people, whether or not you want to become a coach as a profession or not. It is a worthwhile investment. So
and we've got a preview coming up here. We're soon to have an online coaching class that people can take as well, so you can kind of watch for that, and
that will be an introduction to coaching. Yeah. So it won't be the full coaching, but it'll give you a taste,
give you an idea.
Yeah, and we'll be sure when that does become available, we'll certainly alert our listeners and leave links to that as well. Yeah.
There's another number of organizations that just have all of their people, all their staff take our coaching workshop because it's just they find it so helpful. So gotten great reviews on that. So
well, we're very very happy to have that, and led by Bob Royal and Brett Pyle and yourself. But with that, Richard, part 3, the end times.
Yeah. So last week we were looking at the fact that that we looked originally that these different signs are going to be getting more intense, more frequent. And then one of the things that we saw here in the last session, verse 14 says, "This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." So there are certain clues that are a little more bedrock than others. And one of those is that it says that the whole earth will have at least had access to the gospel. So
and I think we talked about that some last time, just how there are whole organizations whose their whole reason for existence is to bring about that end.
Yeah, and they're identifying any people group in the world and then checking to see, do they have a witness? Is the gospel available? Is there scriptures in their language and so on? And they've, as best they know, I mean, there could be some hidden tribe somewhere in a jungle somewhere, but more and more they're getting pretty confident that they know what all the people groups are on the planet and how accessible the gospel is. And so that seems to be, and I think if you just sort of know the heart of God, you'd say he wants heaven occupied with at least a representative of every people group, every kingdom, and so on. And so that seems to be clearly we're drawing near to that. And so if there was any sort of prerequisite before Christ returns to be met, that one seems like it's getting close. And so then you get to verse 15, and it says, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." And so what's interesting about this, and one thing I would just say as well, and as people our listeners are probably noticing, there's a lot of background that you have to try to understand what Jesus is saying. And one of the things I would say, especially in this section, is that you're going to face a certain issue that makes this more complicated, and that is that when people tend to talk about the end times, they tend to have a broader view than just like when we think of the end times, we think of, well, when is Jesus returning?
Yeah,
and like that's the end. When Jesus comes, it's all over. But when people were looking forward, when prophets in the Old Testament were looking forward hundreds of years, they just saw in the Old Testament, they just saw the Messiah coming. And once the Messiah came, then they just realized everything would be different. And I don't know that most prophets weren't necessarily looking forward and saying, yeah, Jesus will come the first time, and then he'll be gone for 2,000 years, and then he'll come back again. They didn't. They just knew that when the Messiah came, he would launch a messianic age. And then when you have Jesus looking forward to his return, he's going to be prophesying of things that will be happening, obviously for 2,000 years. I mean, he'll be talking about wars and rumors of wars that were happening while he was still alive. And so he's going to be covering a lot of space. And so even in this chapter, there's some things that seems to point to a particular time in history. And then there's others, then you might get to the next verse and say, okay, now this seems to be much later. And so that's part of what makes it confusing. And so in this section, he's going to be talking about some things that may already have happened. Before the whole Bible even came into its final form, some of this may already have happened. But then there's other parts that clearly have not happened in 2,000 years. So sometimes you're having to discern, okay, is this talking about specific things maybe in the Roman Empire time, or is this talking about 2,000 years later when Jesus comes back at the end? And so this abomination of desolation is something that was prophesied in the book of Daniel back in the Old Testament. And Daniel had prophesied that something awful was going to happen, and that the Holy of Holies was going to be desecrated. And it was, of course, for a pious Jew to think of some unbeliever, some pagan, coming in and defiling the Holy of Holies was the most unthinkable, the most awful thing to even consider. And most people believe that this is actually referring to someone during the Greek period called Antiochus Epiphanes, who was ruling over Jerusalem and that area at the time of Seleucid. He was called the Seleucid Empire. If you remember, after Alexander the Great died, he actually divided his kingdom up into 4 sections. And so there were the Ptolemies down in Egypt, and there were those ruling Macedon, and the Seleucids were ruling Syria and the Middle East in that area. And this Antiochus Epiphanes became quite a strong leader. And eventually he actually came into the temple and sacrificed a pig on the altar. If you can imagine, just blatantly doing something so shocking, so offensive, so blasphemous, that this just became this became kind of a model of the worst possible thing that could happen. And so, but that had happened before Jesus was walking on the earth. So now Daniel looked forward to it. He didn't look forward to it coming like he wanted it to come, but it was in his future. And so a lot of people would say, well, that prophecy of Daniel happened before Jesus was even walking on the earth. So, but like a lot of prophecies, there can be perhaps more than one occurrence of that. That Antiochus Epiphanes sort of becomes the model. It's just kind of like Babylon becomes the model of a very arrogant, prideful kingdom. Yeah. And then later Rome will be the new Babylon. And so there was one official Babylon, but there's been other sort of, people that have followed the model.
Yeah, copycats, if you
will. And so most people would say, well, Daniel was officially fulfilled when Epiphanes came into the temple, sacrificed a pig, and so on. But But now Jesus is saying this is going to happen again, that there's going to be something so shocking. And what that really represents is something so shocking that it causes everyone to gasp in horror that this could happen. And of course, in 70 AD, the Romans came in and they destroyed the current temple that Jesus knew. They walked into the Holy of Holies. Pompey, the Roman general, actually walked back brazenly into the Holy of Holies, saw there was nothing in there, and was kind of surprised that they didn't have a statue or anything. So there's going to be other times where pagan leaders come into the Holy of Holies. And I think what Jesus in part is saying is when this kind of thing is happening, take note. When the world has so little fear of God and things that are holy, that's a sign that the end time is coming. And so it says, when this happens, when this abomination of desolation takes place, it says, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. A man on the housetop must not come down to get things out of his house, and a man in the field must not go back to get his coat. Woe to pregnant women and nursing mothers in those days. Pray that your escape may not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for at that time there will be great distress, the kind that hasn't taken place from the beginning of the world until now and never will again. So, of course, there's a lot of speculation. What is this referring to? And of course, there's some that interpret this to mean when the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem, and of course it had Jerusalem under siege for a while, and the Christians who had this warning from Jesus, they took it to mean this is what it's talking about, and the Romans are going to desecrate the temple, they're going to desecrate the city. Let's get out of here. And so Jesus had said, at this when it looks like this is about to occur, flee to the mountains. And so historically, when the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem, many of the Christians heeded this counsel and they fled. And of course, if you've ever gone to places like Pella in modern day Jordan, it's in the mountains, and a lot of Christians fled there. And they were spared. They weren't killed. But of course, the Jews believed that there's just no way that God would allow Jerusalem to fall to the Romans, and certainly not allow this magnificent temple to be destroyed. So a lot of the Jews stayed in the city, and they were slaughtered. They were butchered. And so there were Christians who applied it to their day in 70 A.D., and many Christians' lives were spared. And so what Jesus may be saying is, when you see the Roman pagans all coming to destroy the city, destroy and defile the temple, run for your life. Don't delay, don't wait. Of course, the Romans are going to try to surround the city and prevent escape. And so Jesus may well have been saying, if you take too long packing your bags and like shutting down your house, it might be too late. So when you see the danger, escape immediately. So there's those who would look at least this part and say, well, this part has happened. But oftentimes it can also represent something that may happen maybe in a grander scale in the future. And so verse 22 says, unless those days were cut short, no one would be saved. But those days will be cut short because of the elect. And so, again, people are wondering now, which view does Jesus have there? Is he talking about the Roman Empire in 70 AD, the army surrounding Jerusalem at this point? Or is he saying in the last days, the very last days, that no flesh would survive unless the days were cut short? And so, even though God will allow very difficult things to happen, he won't let it carry on too long. And it'll be awful for a season, but then he'll draw it to a close. And there's some that would look at this verse and say, and that's why God will never allow things to get so bad that humanity destroys itself. And there's some, and I would kind of tend to hold to this, that would say that's why I don't know, I don't believe at least that God would ever allow a worldwide nuclear holocaust. There's of course there's been lots of fear, and it's certainly a possibility that so many nuclear weapons could be set off that the whole humanity could be destroyed just by all the aftershock and the radiation and so on. But I feel like verses like this tell us that God would never allow people to so destroy themselves that they literally wiped out humanity, that they destroyed life on earth. I think God is the one that's going to decide when human history comes to a close. So although I wouldn't put it past people to become so wicked and depraved and insane that they tried to destroy people, and there's certainly some fanatic terrorists that would not hesitate to do that, but it seems to be that God is saying, although he allows wars, he allows bloodshed, that God would not let it get so bad that all flesh would perish. And so,
and I guess maybe the counter to, not maybe the counter, but when I think about that, there is also a big gap between total human annihilation and nearly total human. There can be a lot of death and suffering. Up into that. I mean, okay, maybe not all 8 billion of us perish, but if 7 billion of us perish, or half, I mean, there's enormous amounts of suffering that can happen without necessarily total human devastation.
Yeah, and I don't know, and of course, when you read Revelation and some of the plagues and tribulations that come, it talks about like a third or a quarter of humanity being destroyed.
Yeah.
And so, in the end times, there could certainly be some very broad, widespread destruction and even death and suffering that will mark the end times. It certainly will be on a grander and grander scale. But I think ultimately, when it comes to the sort of the final judgment of humanity, God's not going to let people just decide, okay, I think we're going to end human history here.
Yeah.
I think God is going to be sovereign over that. And so, but it's clear that that desecration, that abomination, that sacrilege is going to get worse and worse. And so Jesus paints a pretty grim, stark picture of that. And then he goes on in verse 23 and he says, if anyone tells you then, see, here is the Messiah, or over there, do not believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. Take note, I have told you in advance. So if they tell you, see, he's in the wilderness, don't go out, or see, he's in the storerooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the carcass is, there the vultures will gather. So several things here. Again, he comes back to say there's going to be a lot of false teachers, and they're going to say, some will say, no, he's out here. You can go and you can see the false Messiah. Others will say, no, he's in secret. When it talks about the storeroom, we only those who have secret knowledge can see where he is. He's in this hidden place, this secret place. But what is clear is that people are going to keep proclaiming that they have the answers, that they know the secrets to the end times. And Jesus says, just don't be gullible. Don't be taken in. And he says something kind of interesting. He says they'll perform great signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And of course, you kind of wonder, is this trickery? It doesn't say they will appear to perform great signs and wonders. It doesn't say that they'll be using sleight of hand.
Yeah.
It says that they'll actually be doing signs and wonders. And so whether it's tricks that just appears to be magic, or or if it really is some kind of magical show that they put on. In fact, Jesus says it'll be so compelling, so eye popping in just the magnitude of it, that even the elect, even the believers, will be led astray. And so it's saying, be careful, because there'll be people coming that will be very convincing, and they may even have some form of, it won't be the power of God that they're relying upon, but there seems to be some evidence that at times Satan and his demons can mimic the power of God, and of course that's what it would be. God's not going to lend his power to deception, to false messiahs, but be careful, because and I've heard people say this at times. They'll say, well, this person used scripture, or this person really made a strong case, or this person is performing miracles or healing people, and just because they claim to be healing the sick or doing other miracles does not. You never base the fact that this must be a true prophet. This person must be speaking the truth because they healed someone whose leg was longer on one side than the other. No, that you always measure truth by the word of God, not by did they perform a miracle. Because now, if you are speaking truth, I think there will be a corresponding power of God. But you have to be careful. The way you know for sure they're speaking truth is not that they did a miracle, but that it aligns with what the Bible says. And because here it's saying, yeah, if you can be gullible every time someone does a magic trick or even does a real miracle, then that's not how you measure that. And there'll be false prophets that have the ability to do that. But it says, verse 27, then, it's just one of those, again, another key verse when it comes to understanding the end times. And it says, for as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Now, remember, he was saying, now some people say, oh, he came in secret. He's out in the wilderness, in the desert right now. If you come out into the wilderness, he's living in this small village and only special people get to see him. Or he's in this secret storehouse place, and most people, you can't see him unless you go to this place where he's dwelling right now. Mm-hmm. And so what he's saying is there'll be false teachers who will say, no, Jesus has come, but he's come secretly where you can't see him. Only the elect, only certain people get to see him. But very interesting, in verse 27, Jesus says, no, when I come back, he said, it's going to be like lightning going from the east to the west, right across the sky. And anyone who's ever been in a lightning storm, when you see lightning flashing across the whole sky above you, there's no hiding that. There's nothing secret about that. And that's not even counting the thunder that accompanies it. And so what Jesus was saying is when he returns, everybody will know it. You can't miss it. There'll be nothing secret, is what Jesus is saying about his return. And of course that begs a question, because there are those that teach that there'll be a rapture, there'll be a secret coming. And all I can tell you here is that at least to this point, he's not mentioned that. What he has said is actually it's false prophets who tell you that the Messiah will come secretly in a secret place that only some people know about. Jesus said when he comes back, it'll be like lightning. And so some people try to work that out and say, okay, well, yeah, his final return will be that way. Yeah. But there'll be another earlier rapture, kind of secret return. And we'll keep on reading because there's more that Jesus will say. But at this point, when he actually talks about his return, he talks about it being very visible. And so at this point, if there's a rapture, a secret one coming before this, he's kind of skipped over that. He's not even mentioned that at this point. He said just the opposite. that it's going to be very dramatic and it'll be impossible to miss. And so he's going to say more, and there'll be some things he'll say that can be interpreted in different ways, and we may get more into that next week.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good stopping place, Richard. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.